So this year, Joyful Rebellion by Chaos turned 20. This is a huge milestone for a really significant album. When it came out, it landed as a challenge to how the Canadian music industry handles black artists. Today on the show, Joyful Rebellion 20 years later. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. 20 years ago, we got an album that changed the Canadian pop landscape in a way that I don't think we have seen since.
I tried it, I couldn't fight it. Now I just want to get back to me. Oh, baby. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Back into the man I used to be. Things that I said I wouldn't do, I did them. Secrets below the surface, the truth, I hid them.
It is like illegal for me to not sing the song, but I'm going to help you out. I'm going to save and spare your ears by not singing into them right now. That is a bit of Man I Used to Be, one of several massive singles off Chaos's sophomore album, Joyful Rebellion. This is an album that not only made him one of the biggest Canadian pop stars of the early aughts, but raised some really big questions around what it takes to be a successful rap artist in this country. A new edition of Joyful Rebellion drops this Friday. It includes 4 bonus tracks. Dalton Higgins and Susana Ferreira are 2 Canadian journalists. They were covering Canada's hip-hop scene when this album dropped 2 decades ago. They joined me to take a look back on the impact of Chaos's Joyful Rebellion. Here's our conversation. Dalton, Susana, welcome to the show, friends.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
I'm happy that you're both here. Listen, Dalton, I'm going to start with you. Before we get into Joyful Rebellion, the album itself, I think let's do some table setting. Can you just give us a sense of the stakes for Chaos specifically before this album's release?
Yeah, totally. I mean, for Chaos, the stakes were high. I mean, in the lead up to the release of Joyful Rebellion, we didn't even know if we were going to get another album from Chaos, okay? Because he had released his debut album called Exit, and he had communicated to anyone that would listen that this was going to be his first and last album, okay? So, Exit sold pretty well, and he had some pretty good songs on there, Superstar Part Zero, a bunch of hits. But I was thinking at the time, what is it about the music business that would compel, a young rapper to be like, I'm going to release one album and then I'm out of here, all right? So this was the energy. So with the release of Joyful Rebellion, us music critics, we were wondering if Chaos was having this sort of private fear that he might experience like a sophomore slump, Clearly that was not the case because the guys recorded, at least 3 to 4 strong albums. But I just remember back then when once he had abandoned that exit narrative, I'm going to leave the music industry, and we found out that he was actually going to release another album, the pressure was on.
Yeah, I think the idea of Lauryn Hilling it, right? The idea of like dropping an album, being like, this is it. This is the thing I have to give to the world. Maybe I'll see you later. Maybe I won't. Like that's a position that you find Chaos in. Susana, you, like Dalton, grew up in Toronto and you were listening to local hip hop at the time before, and you're sort of covering the scene as a journalist. Where did Chaos sit in the general world of Toronto hip hop before Joyful Rebellion dropped?
I mean, this talk of the anguish that Chaos was expressing on Exit is making me recall that at the time Toronto was known as the Screwface capital. And that's a term that was coined by Theo 3, but was very much embodied by a good number of people in the scene at the time.
Do you want to explain it a little bit?
Friendly place.
Yeah. Why was it that?
I mean, for a number of reasons. A lot of it, I think, had to do with scarcity. The venues in the city were not particularly friendly to hip hop shows and events. The music industry in general, I mean, at the time, success was very much measured in terms of whether you got a label deal or not. And labels were not exactly handing out deals to Canadian rappers. There were a few, but it was a very difficult industry to break into. And in the midst of all of this, Chaos he was one of the people behind a night called the Love Movement. In the midst of this unfriendly city, there was this Little Italy bar called Alto Basso, and in the basement, was this actually very loving space. It was tiny, it was very cozy, but there was always some sort of, you were shoulder to shoulder with people dancing, and there was always a B-boy and a B-girl circle. This was before Joyful Rebellion dropped. This was the sort of space that was, these were little islands of joy in the midst of an unfriendly city.
Okay, well, since we are here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of this album, why don't we listen to some more music while we talk?
I don't want to change the world. I only want to stop pretending. What you say, come again. What you say, come again now. Nothing left to do but let it burn. I only hope we're all ascending high. What you say, come again. What you say, come again now.
Dalton, I've been doing the show for a year and a half, and this is the hardest episode I've done because all I want to do is sing along, and I'm getting intense looks not to do that. Look, that is a bit of crucial from Joyful Rebellion, which turns 20 this year. Dalton, what was the reaction from the public, from the media, to this record when it dropped?
Yeah. I mean, when Joyful Rebellion came out, just as the title of the album suggests, the rebellion piece of the Joyful Rebellion, I mean, it was a bit of a protest record, to be honest. So it seemed to me that, as a music critic who had interviewed him for, some of the biggest, the Source magazine, New York-based, is called the Bible of Hip Hop Culture. I actually produced a feature story on him. He seemed to be protesting kind of like the hyper materialistic direction that commercial rap was going in. So at the time, there's a track on there called MC Murda, and he's just talking about money and fame. That's all rappers are talking about. Can we talk about other things? And so it was received very well by rap audiences who I think had kind of grown a bit tired of hearing all these high profile commercial rappers sort of just talking about, like money, fast cars, scoring hot women. I mean, the male rappers or the heterosexual male rappers in their rhymes, and it's a bit tiresome. So I would say, there's a really wide array of musical reference points throughout the album. And I think what people were really excited about is that he was kind of messing around with so many, historical Black music forms on the album, right? So you hear a bit of reggae, you hear rock, you hear jazz, you know what I mean? You heard the full spectrum of the Black music experience. So I think that excited music audiences at the time.
Susana, if you had to describe the sound of Joyful Rebellion to someone who's not heard the album before, how would you describe the sound of this record?
Ooh, I think Dalton's touched on a lot of that. The rebellion piece was not only rebelling against sort of the state of the industry or the state of mainstream hip hop at the time, coming out of the Jiggy era, as it were. But also, I remember speaking to him. I interviewed him just after Joyful Rebellion came out, and he talked about wanting the lines that divided different genres, the lines of what Black music is or could be, to die, to let them die, and talked about wanting to return to loving music and making music, but particularly loving it in the way that you do when you're a child and before you feel as though you need to fit into any particular category. And I think that really comes through, as Dalton says, like there's reggae, there's a little bit of Spanish guitar, a little flamenco. It's a rich, wide span. It's a very expansive take on what hip hop could be.
That's exactly right. I think that's exactly how I started to read this album. And also, why don't we listen to some more music? And I'm going to really try, not to sing along this time.
Walking down Young Street on a Friday. Can't follow them, gotta do it my way. No fast lane, still on the highway. Moving in and out, no doubt there's a bride. No time to get down, cause I'm moving up. No time to get down, cause I'm moving up. No time to get down, cause I'm moving up. Shake off the crabs in the bucket.
That's the one. That is the one. That is Crab Bucket from Chaos off his now classic album, Joyful Rebellion, which is turning 20 this year. Commotion is looking back on the significance of that album with Dalton Higgins and Susana Ferreira. Susana, you were cutting your teeth as a music journalist when Joyful Rebellion dropped. You said that you could feel the difference in energy around Chaos at the time of this release. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was the energy around him?
I I can give an example. I was in university writing for my college paper, and starting to write for Acclaimed magazine, which is not the Bible of hip hop. It is. It covers many genres, and I recall that in 2004. I wrote for the hip hop section, and every year the critics or the writers for any particular section will compile what we think are the best albums of the year. And Joyful Rebellion came in at maybe 5. And the list is fairly eclectic. There were, you could say, mainstream artists, Ghostface and Kanye West were higher up. But you also had Murs and Madvillain, who I would not consider mainstream artists. But the readers poll was chaos all the way. He topped the readers poll list for that year. And what that told me, among other things, was that he was drawing in a lot of people who had not been listening to hip hop, or in particular hadn't been listening to Canadian hip hop before. It was a broader audience.
Dalton, one of the unwritten rules, I think it's probably a written rule at this point of hip hop, is if you become the biggest thing, people are going to come for you. People are going to turn towards you and say, no, you don't really belong here. Dalton, so Joyful Rebellion becomes the biggest selling, it makes Chaos the biggest selling rapper in Canada at the time. It gets all this critical acclaim. But it also begins to stoke some noteworthy tensions that we should talk about in the Toronto rap scene and the Canadian music industry in general. Do you want to talk about that, about the tensions that bubbled up in response to this ostensibly joyful album?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I would say that with, rappers in general, and then, Canadian rappers in particular, so at the time, their rappers are getting pigeonholed, so rappers who don't do the 2 turntables and a microphone routine, which is a bedrock of rap music and hip hop culture and performance. Let's say you take a rapper now and then you add all of these musical elements that kind of sound, I guess, quote unquote, non-traditional. So Chaos at the time, when he's performing his live show, he has a tabla player, which we know from, as far as South Asian music traditions. He has electric guitars. So a lot of, music constituencies, they had grown accustomed to this 2 turntables and a microphone. You do something outside of that, then you have these, a lot of really ignorant music critics, right, who are not well versed on hip hop culture or rap music, and they start calling it like alternative hip hop, or giving it some kind of, lousy description. Perhaps not knowing that hip hop culture is rooted in having no rules, right? Like in rap music, you sample, classical music, opera, jazz, blues, you just do whatever. There's no rules. So then here comes Chaos, right? We have this fixed notion of what a rapper should be doing: 2 turntables, a microphone. He has tablas, guitars, and he's collaborating with, rock musicians like Sam Roberts, out of Montreal. Yeah. And it made sort of mind expansion, right? It sort of blew the top off what your preconceived notion of what you think a rapper should be doing. That's what he was doing.
But it's worth mentioning the performance from Carnel Official at that Mark Echo Getting Up Festival, which is 2005. This is in Toronto, and then it came to symbolize these tensions. Do you want to talk about what Cardi did on stage?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the Mark Echo Fest, massive festival where, a lot of the A-list American rappers, turned out, performed. And it was interesting because, at that festival, it seems that, there are a lot of, what he did is he goes up on stage, just in a nutshell, right? He goes up on stage, he brings a guitar with him on stage, right? At the Mark Echo Fest.
And Cardinal is not a guy who performs with a guitar. That's not how we know him.
Cardinal does not know how to play guitar, doesn't perform the guitar.
Yes.
And so he brings a guitar up on stage, and he kind of makes this statement about saying, hey, almost like he's talking to the Canadian music industry suits at the time, right? Who are at the time were pretty clueless about how to sign, market, and sell Canadian hip hop. And he kind of says, hey, is this, I don't know what he said verbatim, but he was just talking about how, is this what you accept as being music? Does it have to have guitars to blow up, to be, palatable to you, for you to take interest in it? And then he kind of smashes the guitar on stage, right? So he does this kind of punk move. And then, so it was a critique of certainly the Canadian music industry, the suits loving their guitars. And at the same time being clueless about hip hop, right? So that's why that was my interpretation of why he smashed the guitar, right? Yeah. It's like a protest against Canadian music industry, right? And then also, too, I got to notice, also, Elamin, a Canadian media outlet, they tried to turn this into a diss of Chaos. But I don't think that's what he was doing.
Yeah, it certainly reads to me, and I say this as someone who was not there. I was living 2.5 hours east in Kingston, Ontario. But it reads to me as like a sort of a critique of the respectability politics in the Canadian, music industry. Like the idea that you demand you sort of show up in a certain light, certain respectable light, in order to be given the platform that you are given, which certainly Chaos was given at the time. Okay, so Chaos was asked about that guitar smash and those tensions for an episode of CBC's This Is Not a Drake podcast back in 2020. Here's a bit of what Chaos had to say.
Anytime someone tells you you have to be like somebody else, you automatically feel subjugated. So yeah, I understand that. But also, this is the game we're in. Because I had Maestro and Mishimi and like Socrates and all these people to kind of outdo. No one talks about that. They just talk about the arrival of this record, Joyful Rebellion. But I actually had the same reaction that they had with the smashing of the guitar, to being like, why do I have to be like Sox? Why do I have to be like Jellystone? Why do I have to be like Ghetto Concept? Why do I have to be like the Rascals?
Susana, maybe you can talk about the larger tensions that Dalton was referring to. Like, what do you make of what Chaos was saying there?
I mean, one thing to bring into the context is also that, the Suits loved their guitars, and who was big at the time, who was being promoted, Broken Social Scene, Feist, Nelly Furtado a few years before. Nelly Furtado was in the Crab Bucket video.
Yeah.
They were the ones who were really making it big. And you could only dream, but it would be a foolish dream to hope for the same level of support and care with hip hop. But I mean, I agree with the point Dalton made as well, that there was this attempt to turn them against each other, to turn this into a beef, and that comes from the scarcity mentality, the scarcity that drives crabs in the bucket, and that drives in part the screw face. The screw facery, which is that there can only be one. Like, why the room for rappers was made purposefully very small. The platform was made very narrow.
Especially so in this country. But we got to say, 20 years since Joyful Rebellion, we've seen a lot since then. We've seen Kanon, we've seen Shad, we've seen Drake, we've seen Tory Lanez, although we wish we hadn't. We've seen Pressa, we've seen Havaya Mighty, we've seen Cadence Weapon, and of course, most recently, Mustafa. And you hear Mustafa's album and the stuff that's about to come out, because he's sort of putting out an album at the end of September, and you think, this is like a direct successor. This could only exist in a world where Joyful Rebellion sort of opened that door. And they're all finding these various degrees of success, both nationally and internationally. Dalton, when you think about all this, where do you think Chaos and the success of this Joyful Rebellion record sit among other achievements right now?
Yeah, totally. I mean, what I would say about Joyful Rebellion, one thing that makes that album stand out from the pack of rap releases and just Canadian music in general is that it doesn't sound dated. Okay, so you can stick that album on now and it has timeless songs. Man, I used to be Crab Bucket. They're timeless. It's interesting because I was on the Polaris Music Prize's Heritage Prize jury that selected Joyful Rebellion to win that award. Right, like the Heritage Prize is sort of meant to celebrate, sort of timeless classic Canadian albums.
Yeah.
That were created before Polaris even came to be, right? And it's because of that enduring quality, right? So kind of like when I'm sitting on these juries like that, that jury that sometimes tend to lean more heavily towards, rock and roll, pop, country, other like non-Black musics.
Yeah.
I would always try to bring up these timeless rap classics, like Joyful Rebellion or Breaking Atoms from Main Source. These types of records that are timeless and they kind of deserve the same, if not more recognition than some of the classic records that we spend, rock records, Sloan, Broken Social Scene, et cetera. Like they're, give it the same type of attention, because it carries that same enduring, timeless quality to it as any Sloan record. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
Oh, of course. Susana, take us home here. When you think about all the Canons and the Shads and the Drakes and the Havayas and the Mustafas, where do you think this achievement, this record of Joyful Rebellion sits alongside those achievements?
I mean, I think it's kind of beautiful to think of it as having opened a space, not having opened a space alone, but having been part of this opening that would make room for you referenced Mustafa's record, and he sings like an angel, and he has songs about grief and about friendship and faith, and you find some of that in this album as well. Yeah, it's beautiful to think of all of them as being in some sort of community together.
I have appreciated being in community with the two of you as we talked about the legacy of this album. Thank you so much for your time and for being on the show today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I live a pop life, so stop acting like a stoplight. Darling, your head's just not right. I only wanna rock right. And you know the song. I was rolling down the back way, and the pride before the fall.
That is a bit of Same Ole, one of 4 new bonus tracks on the Joyful Rebellion reissue. That reissue drops this Friday. Before that, we marked 20 years of Chaos's classic album with music journalists Susana Ferreira and Dalton Higgins. That is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdulmahmoud. It is my joy and my privilege to wish you a happy, happy Thanksgiving. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.